Well, we've been in the book of Galatians this summer, and we're sticking there again this week. We were in chapter 2 last week. We're picking up right where we left off in chapter 3 for today. It might sound like this summer we're talking about the same thing over and over again, and we kind of are, because Galatians is really only about a couple of key things that Paul's hammering on over and over again. But I promise you, today's sermon is not the same as last week. I think only Corey could get away with preaching the same sermon twice, and I am not him. So last week, Paul talked about how our beliefs or our faith can cause division between people, put up walls or create these boundaries that keep people out of the faith, people that God is calling in, that goes against the gospel that says that everyone is invited. And today, Paul's still on that same tangent, but what I see Paul doing is getting more into the individual side of things, how that affects our own relationship with God, the way we see God, the way we see ourselves, and the way we see other people. So my son, Jack, he's 3 years old. You see him running around here sometimes, and he's so much fun. I love hanging out with him. We hung out yesterday for most of the day, and he's really independent. He's relatively brave, I suppose, and he's very determined. He loves to do things on his own. He loves to try things, and I'll try and help him with stuff, like fill a glass of water for him, or fill up his water gun, or his bubble machine, and we're making good progress, getting through the process. And without fail, almost every time, he's like, "Daddy, stop. Jack, do it." And I'm like, "Bro, just please let me do this for you." He's like, "Jack, do it. Let me fill the machine. Let me get you the water. Let me just finish." And he's like, "No." So I step back and let Jack do it. And almost every time, the water spills, or the bubble solution goes everywhere, or we drop the juice in the ground, it overflows. And then myself and my wife, Christy, end up cleaning it up. And I'm like, "Man, why can't you just let me handle it? Why do you have to do it every time?" And then I look at myself and I'm like, I am the exact same way when it comes to God. And Paul says here in Galatians 3, he says, "You irrational Galatians, who put a spell on you? I want to know this from you. Did you receive the Spirit by doing the works of the law, those things that make someone outwardly Jewish? We talked about it last week. Or by believing what you heard? Are you so irrational? After you started with the Spirit, are you now finishing with your own human effort?" He's like, "You started off so great, guys. You received this free gift of grace from God. Now you're trying to do it all on your own, trying to earn it with your own efforts." And he goes on, he says, "So I ask again, does God give you his Spirit and work miracles among you by these works of the law, or by believing what you heard? Why take these things that began in grace and try and do them with your own strength?" God's like, "I've done all the work for you. I've done everything. Why won't you just receive it?" And we're like, "No, I got it. Josh, do it. Josh, do it," every time. And I look at myself and I'm like, I'm just like every child out there. Then I wonder, why do I begin to feel burdened? Or why do I carry so much guilt for the things that I've done? Or why do I look at somebody else in judgment? Because we can't be perfect. And Paul's trying to shake the Galatians awake. He's like, "You didn't start this journey with effort, so why are you trying to finish it that way?" And he keeps going in verses 6 and onward. He says, it's like Abraham, this Jewish forefather. He says, he believed God, and it was counted to him for righteousness. So it's these people of faith, those who believe, who are children of Abraham. The Bible foresaw that God would justify the nations by faith. So it announced the gospel to Abraham in advance when it declared the nations will be blessed by you. Paul's reminding the Galatians, you've been welcomed into the family of Abraham. that everything promised to Abraham, his whole inheritance is already given to you. You'll receive all that was promised to him. And this inheritance, this grace given by Jesus, salvation given by Jesus, comes through faith and not by some kind of performance, not by trying to do it ourselves, but that's not how we tend to be wired. We live in this culture of hustle and image and performing more and working harder. We have these phones we carry around all the time that are a constant temptation just to put our whole lives on display, to show the world what we've got. Now, I love to work. I love working hard. I like seeing my friends' lives on the internet. I love showing how cute my kids are. It's amazing. But the problem is we bring the same mindset of performance, of showing what we've got, into our relationship with God. As if we could work harder or perform well enough to prove that we deserve what's already been given to us. I grew up in a pretty conservative Christian tradition. I mentioned that last week. It maybe my perception bordered on legalism. It was a lot of emphasis on rule following, doing the right things, behaving the right way. And then on top of that, my dad, he was a guy with really high standards, not just for himself, but for the whole world around him. He had just high standards for all. And he was my biggest fan, my biggest supporter. He was a great fan of mine so often. He was always behind me. But there was this thing that it seemed like in his mind, no matter how well I did, there was always an area for improvement. And he's probably right, but he always had these little critiques that would help me get better. But what I heard, or he meant as critiques, I kind of heard as the ways that I fell short, that I didn't quite measure up. And I internalized this idea that if I didn't quite perform how he wanted me to, that I had to earn his approval or earn his love almost. And this happened in like my grades, in sports, in all areas of success that I went after. I had this sense that I had to kind of earn what was already been given to me by my dad, because I was always going to be his son. I'd always be part of his family, and he would always love me. But I had this mindset. It was cultural. It was spiritual. It was relational in my family. And I took this mindset that I had, and I projected it on to God, that I had to perform my way into God's love, that I had to earn belonging into what he's given me. But what Paul's saying here is no, righteousness has never come through performance, not through law, not through law keeping, not through rule keeping. It's always been by faith. And to prove it, God goes all the way back to Abraham, this old Jewish forefather. He says, Abraham just believed God and was credited to him as righteousness. Before the law, before the 10 Commandments, before any kind of rules or regulations, Abraham simply believed, and that was it. And that's the pattern. That's the whole point. It's simply about belief and faith. One of my favorite memories growing up is my 6th birthday. My parents splurged and they bought me a Super Nintendo entertainment system. And back before there were like Wii's and Switches and phones, the SNES was the pinnacle of home video game playing. This thing changed our household. My sisters and I played all the time. We had so much fun and a lot of fights, but also a lot of fun playing this thing. And we had a few games that were fun to play, but what I really loved doing was going to the video store and renting video games. Any memories of going to the video store, like renting a VHS or a video game where I was a DVD? That was a thing we used to do. And it was the coolest thing. My mom, my grandma would take me down to the video store and I'd look at the wall of video games, just like all these options The world was my oyster at 6 years old. Look at the games that I could rent. It was the coolest thing. And one of these games I rented a couple of times was a game called The Lion King by Disney. Some fans out there, I love it. It was a great game, kind of. It started off great, actually, but I could never get very far in the game. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't get past the second or third level. So I'd rent it and play it, then return it, and then go rent it again, or my mom would rent it. I begged my mom to rent it again. Let's get this game again, and I could not beat this game. And I'm pretty good at video games, so I think, and I couldn't get anywhere. Well, this year, I read an article that said the developers of this game made the game intentionally hard so that kids couldn't beat it. They wanted kids to go out and actually buy the game instead of renting it because they made more money that way. They made it so hard you couldn't beat it in a rental period, or multiple rental periods in my case. And I said, they tricked me. My little 6-year-old self was deceived by these developers. And they came out and actually apologized for it recently. And I look at this memory and I think to myself, I was set up to fail from the beginning. No wonder I was so frustrated. I think sometimes we look at God and look at the Bible and think the exact same thing. Like we've been set up to fail from the start. We look at these rules or these laws and think that God just gave us this whole thing as a trap. But that's not what Paul's saying. That isn't what God was doing here at all. See, the law wasn't bad. These rules in our Bible weren't bad, but they weren't meant to justify or to make us right with God. They could never fix anything that was wrong with us. They could just guide us. They were a guide or a placeholder. They revealed our inability to live up to what we could, but they could never fix us. They can't fix what we need to work on in our lives. And Paul goes on in verse 10. He says, all who rely on the law are under a curse. Because the law demanded perfection. These rules demanded perfection. And no one can be perfect, right? He says, but nobody is justified before God in the law. It's clear that the righteous shall live by faith. And here's the good news. He says, Christ redeemed us from the curse of the law by becoming a curse for us. There's this idea in the book of Deuteronomy in our Old Testament that someone to be hung on a tree would be under a curse. And Paul juxtaposes the curse of the law with the curse of being on a tree, the crucifixion of Jesus, and says Jesus took on this curse. Why? He says, this was so the blessing of Abraham, the promise to Abraham could flow through Jesus to the nations so we could all receive that same promise by faith. Not effort, not performance, but only by faith. And in verse 15, he says, back to Abraham, brothers and sisters, I'll take an example from human experience. No one ignores or makes additions to a validated will. I'm saying this Jewish law, which came 430 years later after Abraham, doesn't invalidate the agreement that was previously validated by God so that it cancels the promise. If the inheritance were based on the law, it would no longer be from the promise. But God has graciously given it to Abraham through a promise. Can you catch the theme here? Promise, 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 Paul's saying. And this translation, I love this translation. He says, a validated will. Think of grace like an inheritance. When someone leaves an inheritance through a will, that inheritance is secure. It's locked in. But imagine for a moment that the person, the heir, is underage. They can't receive that inheritance until they're 18 or 21 or 25. And so whoever's in charge of the estate will appoint a trustee to oversee this inheritance until the person is of age, come into the full reception of this inheritance. They'll kind of guide them and point them and manage the estate for them. And that's what the law was. It was a trustee for God's people until they could receive Jesus. In the next section of our chapter, actually, Paul gets even deeper into that whole idea, which Phil preached on 3 weeks ago. Go back and check that out, talking about the schoolmaster, the trustee that the law was. But Paul's talking about this inheritance, this guiding, the trustee guiding his people, preparing them to receive the inheritance. And then Jesus comes along, says, now you're of age. You have access to everything that I have. The inheritance promised to Abraham thousands of years ago is now yours to receive. The law was never the way we were made right with God, never the way we were justified. It shaped identity. It formed a relationship with God and with people, but it didn't save and it couldn't save. And Paul says the law that came 430 years after Abraham, it couldn't cancel that promise. It couldn't override what God had already guaranteed, his grace and salvation in Jesus to come. The promise was always the plan all along. Here's why that matters for us today. I think some of us have this instinct deep down, this nagging voice that we have to still try and earn what's been freely given. That if we try harder or follow the rules better, if we look the part, God will be more pleased with us or more accepting of us or more generous with us. We still want to look at the law as the way that Jewish people tried to be made right with God, but that was never the point. We still look at it and we're like, but if I try harder, maybe I'm different. If I try harder, maybe I could earn God's favor or God's love. But the whole point was you never had to. The promise was always the point. Or sometimes we'll look at somebody else. And despite the grace that we've received, we'll say, well, why aren't they working harder? Why aren't they earning it better? We project this performance mindset onto them instead of giving them the same grace that's been given to us. Paul's reminding us that's not how an inheritance works. You don't earn an inheritance, you just receive it. You don't achieve family, you're just born or invited into it. You don't pay for a gift, you just accept the gift. And in Christ, you've already been invited, you've already been brought in, already given this promise, and it's yours to accept. So why are we still performing, trying to beat a game that's unbeatable? As we wrap up today, I've got a few questions for you just to think on, reflect on. I'm going to invite Carrie to come and prepare for our confession today, but some questions to sit with you this morning. Why are you trying to earn what's already yours? Why do we try and earn what's already ours? What would it look like to stop striving for a promise that's been freely given? Or how would it look to assume that same grace that you've received on everyone you come in contact with? The promise was always the point, and the promise has already been fulfilled in Christ for you today. Carrie, would you lead us?